We'd like to invite the next panelist on stage, driving machine learning for everyone. Okay, people, let's go. Some energy. There we go.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Reena Jana. I'm creative lead for business inclusion at Google. Oh, you can't. Is that better? Okay, I will face this way.
All right.
Is that better? Okay, I'll be very careful with not moving my head too much. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about driving machine learning for everyone. And when we talk about machine learning, just to set the context, we're talking about methods that teach machines to recognize patterns by example rather than by pre-programmed rules. And then the idea is really to get them to learn over time and adjust to unique situations. So given that context, you can see where inclusion is an issue, a challenge, and also an opportunity. So I'd love to introduce you to the panelists. Hope the sound will be okay for the rest of this. But they'll be talking more than I. So we have Natasia Malaihollo. She is the founder and CEO of Wiser. She's based in Kentucky, and she and her team build fun and engaging user feedback surveys. And yes, we said that in the same sentence, and she's going to tell you how she does that and uses machine learning to do so. Beside her is Jean-Baptiste, who is a diversity business specialist at Google. She's also on our Integrating Inclusion initiative, and she consults with product teams across the company and really specializes in machine learning and research right now on how to apply an inclusive lens to products throughout the development cycle. Beside her is Margaret Wallace. She's a co-founder and CEO of Playmatics, and they create multi-platform games for a variety of organizations, corporations, nonprofits, and she speaks a lot about inclusion in the AI space as well. And beside Margaret is David Karam. He's the founder of a couple of startups that have used machine learning on the back end, and now he is at Google. He's a product manager in our research and machine intelligence group. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you. We'll also open up to questions towards the end. So just to start off, there's more than one method for machine learning, so I think it'd be great to hear, if you could highlight a technique that you're working on now that has led to basically an inclusive product or inclusive feature.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start. So as you know, I build surveys that look and feel like games, and then we use machine learning to turn all of that feedback data into tasks for the different roles within a company. One of the most important things for us is just making sure that the source of our data sets to train our models are as inclusive and represents as big of a population size and a sample size as possible. So definitely we use a lot of public data sets. Of course, we use Google data sets, but also Yelp is a really good source of public data to train your models.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. As Reena mentioned, I work a lot on the product design process at Google and making sure it's super inclusive. And I think one of the ways that we do that is to talk to people, right? So making sure that we're not staying in the Silicon Valley space, but making sure we're expanding our reach once we start to think about what machine learning is and how to start to build those data sets.
Hey everybody, so within the world of game development, we've been using AI and machine learning a lot for a variety of applications throughout the history of video games. And I would say one thing that we've learned is just because you can do something using AI does not mean you ought to, in terms of delivering an entertaining product that is also entertaining for your target audience. Sometimes things emerge out of a design that you wouldn't even necessarily expect. The one product I worked on actually early on in my career was a product called Dogs and Cats, and they were the first ever virtual pets programs. And we learned there firsthand that delivering believable characters in the context of these virtual pets was really a matter of art meets science. So behavioral design and artificial intelligence and machine learning, so adaptive characters, but that there was an art to it, almost sort of like how you would think how Disney handles their characters.
I'm involved in computer vision, which is a hot topic right now, and a lot of what we do is try to understand the content of imagery. So this includes stuff like, searching your photos library for hugs or dogs.
I love your examples. They also sort of reflect the nature of your work. And what's really interesting about the panelists' work is they all seem to focus on fun and engaging designs. And I'm really curious, when we think about machine learning, we think about the back end, but you focus a lot on the front end experience and this idea of engagement. So why is that important? I mean, you sort of touched on it a little bit with inclusive data, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of fun.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So data is naturally very complex. And if you look at the demographic of like the United States and the world, there's over 300 million people, but only less than 20,000 data scientists. And so I think core, before you even get into like the tech of machine learning and all the different algorithms, like really making sure that the functions that you're building and the things that the technologies that you're building is actually something everyone can use is probably key to that. And playful design is a way that you can engage with people regardless of what their backgrounds are and whether they're tech or not. You can engage them for their feedback.
Yeah, Margaret, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, so I mean, I have a couple examples I can think of. So for one, a couple years ago, we worked with this organization called the Millennium Institute. And they've been around for 50 years, and they develop models that assess the health of nations. And they take in all of these different economic and environmental variables, and they spit out sort of the results, and it says, well, in 5 years, there's a 50% chance that this nation will improve or decline. And so we had to take that data set and put that into a game. And what games are, video games are essentially, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is they're really constructed contexts for play, right? And they're constructed contexts, they're like a sandbox where you have rules and you have systems and you're really paying attention to flow. And if we had, to a lot of everyone else's points here as we've been discussing, if we had exposed that data set all at once or sort of in the way that it was built, it would have been incredibly dry and boring. So really, the fun factor aids in discovery at its most fundamental level.
I would reinforce that. I mean, play is the way we learn almost everything and discover everything. It's the way we map the edges of our world. It's the way we figure out that things are right or wrong. So before I came to Google, I had a startup that was involved in speech synthesis. And what we noticed was that the scientist would take excerpts from like historical fiction and then have some actor read these excerpts and they'd create a synthetic voice. And as you might imagine, when you tried to have like a sports announcer type voice, but that was trained on Alice in Wonderland, you'd get this really kind of dry reading of the material. So the startup we believed that there wasn't just one personal assistant or 3 made by the major big companies. We wanted to democratize speech synthesis. We wanted everyone to have the ability to make a computer voice. And a lot of this was for playful type applications, so that small companies or individuals could make their own voice, and that voice could be, a little bit crazy or not so restrained as what you might be able to buy off the shelf from a big company.
It's really interesting. It makes me think of, there's evidence that when you create really playful experiences, you can sort of garner these very inclusive data sets. Like at Google, Creative Lab had done an AI experiment called Quickdraw. I don't know if anybody has played with that, but it's very simple. It trains machines to recognize very simple sketches of commonly recognized objects like cats or chairs. Nobody expected this to be this large open global data set, but 800 million drawings in the data set now from 100 countries, including South Africa, Brazil, Japan, of course the United States. But I think that really speaks to your points of why fun is interesting. You can garner some really interesting and inclusive data to train models on. Awesome. Okay, so in terms of, say you're designing these engaging experiences, you're being careful in using diverse data. What about the output? What about what you're producing from the machine learning? How do you ensure that that's inclusive, accessible, useful for a variety of people after you've made it and used that inclusive data?
I'll jump in here. I think what's important is having diversity of people kind of thinking through what that data set looks like, right? So at Google, we've worked with people from academia, UX, privacy, diversity, equity, the list goes on, right, to think through the plan before the process starts. I think it's important that diversity inclusion is embedded in the beginning, right? It's not an afterthought. And so if you have those diversity of perspectives from the beginning, I think it'll be more accessible and useful to more people at the outset.
Yeah, and I think Annie mentioned it earlier, like it's important to be constantly asking questions and testing, because I think like a lot of people, like you don't know what you don't know. And so an output might be something that you and your team thinks is correct, but it's actually like, it's not representative. And so sometimes just putting it out there and being willing to ask, and I think you have to know that you don't know everything, and being able to at least know where to ask and make sure that it gets into the right hands and gets tested by the right people outside of your own team. Because I think sometimes in tech, like you're in a bubble and you develop for people just like you or people that are similarly minded, and I think it's important to kind of like go beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so case in point, I was playing a game that was a wildlife identification game. It's a really wonderful game, but the first thing I was given to find within my urban area was a hummingbird. Well, so there was, I think, a gap in the AI, and then eventually the machine learning, because this game has had a lot of players, that as a new player, I probably should have been served something like a pigeon, because it was easier to find a pigeon than, the hummingbirds that fly, 30 miles an hour. And so that's just one way, and I think the point about throwing what you've created once you've made those algorithms to as many people and players as you possibly can. In the world of game development, players, and I'm sure in any field, surprise us. We never really know how they're going to use our systems till they use it. We call that emergent behavior. And a lot of times in video games, especially players, they try to break the AI. They try to break the system and game the machine learning. And that's something else that you can really only truly discover when you throw it to as many players as possible. It doesn't have to start out with as many players as possible. Just even starting out with regular, consistent play testing as a discipline, so many folks overlook that step still.
Reena just organized an event at the Grace Hopper celebration that was an excellent event, and our head of cloud, Fei Li, said, models trained on inclusive data sets will help to democratize AI. And, this is a step to inclusivity, and one of the things that Grace Hopper celebration shows us is like what an engineer looks like. So when we answer certain questions like this, we want, communities to represent themselves in a way that's authentic.
Speaking of communities, how important is it to sort of be present in communities when you're building machine learning fueled products? Like I think recently I was at a Haiti tech summit in Haiti, and a number of people were saying, I'd love to think about machine learning, but I need to think of other things first. But actually, you could play a role by training or just even being present in that community and talking about it was a way to sort of open the door to get involved in some way. So I'm wondering what your points of view are in terms of being physically present in communities that are underrepresented online and might be underrepresented in training data for machine learning. How important is it to be like in the community physically with these systems and these ideas?
So I guess I can start. So my team, we're a very diverse team, and so lately they've been obsessed with showing all of the ways that machine learning can go wrong. So if you've ever and you can look this up. There's a lot of these examples, but one of the most popular examples when machine learning goes wrong is a soap dispenser. So I don't know if many of you know the kind of the story, but a white person was in a bathroom and they like use a soap dispenser and the soap dispense for them to wash their hands. But then an African-American person was in the same bathroom, used a soap dispenser, and they didn't. So they were like, well, maybe this is like a fluke. But then when the Caucasian person went back to kind of wave their hand at the soap, it worked. And so I think it's very important to be present and testing all of your things, not just, I mean, people are interested in very different things, but that's kind of like where machine learning can go very wrong. There's tons and tons of examples of things like that where people are building really great and useful products. I mean, an automatic soap dispenser is a wonderful product for everyone, but things like that where it's not recognizing skin color, it's not just recognizing like forms and things like that, like I think it becomes a huge problem. And I think you don't know things like that unless you're physically present in a community.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that that's a great example, and I think you just have to think about like your input is directly affecting your output, right? So if your input is inherently not inclusive, then you can expect that your output won't be either. So something that we do at Google and a lot of companies is we eat our own dog food, which means we test our own products before we launch them. And so one thing we've been really committed to is making sure that our dog fooding pools are inclusive and reflect the world around us and the diversity of the world around us. So we know that if the same type of person, right, tries a product, whether it's internally or externally, they may come to the same conclusions, right? So we have to be really diligent about making sure there are different perspectives in the beginning of the process, so we get those different perspectives, critical feedback, and it's not an afterthought in trying to scramble after the fact to fix something that we thought was inclusive, but we only had kind of a certain type of people in the room to make those key decisions.
Okay, and two really quick examples that come to the top of my head. One involves a product that I wasn't a part of, but I did a focus group. They are an eatery, and they have computer-based and mobile apps where you can order food, and they introduced a gamified feature called dynamic pricing. And they rolled it out to their entire community. And apparently there was such an enormous backlash because people felt like if I buy a brownie, I expect that brownie to be 75 cents or $1.50, and I don't want it to change every other day based on these variables that aren't even exposed or transparent to me. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And then quickly, we just formed a partnership, my company, with Girls Inc. of New York City, and we're still in the process of trying to get it off the ground. But the plan there is we're going to do mobile game development using middle school girls to teach them game development, programming skills to whatever extent we can within the confines of the program to help them to work with them to drive the narrative, drive the game design, and also have something to say about, again, those aspects of machine learning that may or may not hit with the audience, or may not resonate, or may not alienate people. So those are two quick examples.
David?
What Annie said. The dog fooding is so important. Yeah.
Yum.
Before we open it up to questions in a couple of minutes, are there any sort of best practices that you've been observing or trends you've been seeing in the industry that you want to sort of close with?
Just really quick, this has implications for inclusion. One of the hottest areas for machine learning in terms of game development right now are in a couple areas: storytelling, blockchain-enabled transactions, which may or may not involve some levels of machine learning, but AI and all that stuff. And I would say also just marketing. It's a huge exploding area in games.
There are three areas that we're really seeing that are important, and one of them we tend to call just trying to kind of understand what we're doing, and there's fairness, explainability, and openness. And so some of the stuff we do is kind of think that fairness really isn't just a default. Like one of the projects we worked with the Gina Davis Institute was to just create some statistics on, the appearance of female leads in films, for instance. So we analyzed tons of films, and we showed that, okay, the leads are like 17% of the top grossing films. We also look at like what we call equality of opportunity And there's some great articles that you might be able to read on that. With explainability, these things aren't just black boxes. They need to be more transparent, whether the data set is more transparent, it's more debuggable, whatever. We have to have ways that we can look at these black boxes and take them apart and show why and when they might fail. And then I think in terms of openness, education, helping everybody to understand, that AI isn't here to eat your brain or take over. It's just more technology, and it has the same kind of properties that other technology has, and we need to kind of talk about what it is and what it can do and what its limits are. And then, having open source software, like kind of, again, for the transparency, and open data sets, so that we're not just holding these private data sets as big companies that, we don't have to explain, that we all share things that, help everyone.
Do you want to share any?
No, I mean, he had all my points.
So what I'm hearing from the panel in terms of, it seems like there are 3 questions you can leave with and maybe ask yourselves as you go forward and pursue driving machine learning for everyone. I'd love, if you guys don't mind, before we start questions, raise your hands in terms of what you might ask next after you leave this conference, or what you might do next. I mean, one might be to commit to using more diverse data. So how many of you are doing that or will leave here sort of pursuing more inclusive data sets? Just would love to see. Cool. The other thing we talked about was sort of diverse testing, like testing. How do you ensure, even if you're making things with the best of intentions, the most inclusive data sets, how many of you are going to leave here and either have a program for diverse testing, inclusive testing, maybe you have it already. Cool, see more hands come up. All right. And then finally, community engagement, like getting physically into communities, educating, doing the testing in the communities, maybe going to places that don't have access to even, the actual equipment to do it. But so curious about that, like commitment to communities physically. Awesome. Great, great, great.
Yeah, maybe not even just are you doing it, but what do you believe that that should be done? Is this, to Reena's points, is there a strength that we believe in that any one of them could help more than the other? Like, would just diversifying our workforce more strongly be a route, or would the data sets seemingly important? It's hard to answer these questions until you get really deeply into the subject and test and try. I mean, we don't have the answers. So it's always good for us to hear from others what you believe the right paths to take would be.
Definitely ask these questions. And speaking, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, just really quickly. Please. So in my own sort of practical interactions with people, I've also been advocating for something that I invented the term, no, I probably didn't, called cognitive flexibility. While we're in this process of this big, huge AI machine learning revolution, where we're still ourselves learning what we're making and how it's unfolding, creating a level of awareness with people to want to know about algorithms and how they're used, and also to create a flexibility in all of us that, when we're confronted with something we don't understand or is confusing, to just bounce back from that. Because that kind of reaction and awareness, I think, is going to be important for our near-term survival.
On that note, would love to hear questions, comments, like your own experiences with machine learning. Please, I think we have somebody with a mic. Yeah, it's going to come over to you.
Hi there. With what we've seen with Facebook and Twitter and the election and how the algorithms failed and AI is failing on those levels, how do you plan for that so that that doesn't keep happening?
Panelists, want to take that?
So I think in terms of what we're seeing with Facebook and dissemination of all of this bad data that's being continuously used, I think you have to, as a company, need an aggressive stand to tag those and take them out. Personally, that's my personal experience. Like you can't, when you use bad data, I mean, it's in any type of machine learning. If you're using bad data to train models, that's exactly what the models are going to do, and they're going to continuously do that. And so you have to take a very proactive approach to remove bad data sets out of the data if you don't want these continuous outcomes. And I think they're like upping their game on that. But active removal of bad data sets to me is just kind of what they would aggressively approach.
Anyone else?
I think just not demanding, but expecting accountability and full transparency may not be fully possible because, my gosh, we're in a data-driven world. But a large amount of transparency can be expected. And I think we ought to also be educating our policymakers and our public officials whose learning curve is a little bit like, woo, So
Good point.
Do we have another question? I think back here. Oh, right here, sorry. I think there's somebody with a mic.
Yes,
somebody actually has a question with the mic.
Yeah,
we're waiting.
kind of to follow up on the first question, is there any AI program being applied to detect abusive behavior online? Because that would be really useful. Those companies always complain that they don't have enough people on their team to go through, all the natural language stuff.
The New York Times right now uses some moderation software that helps them process the large amounts of comments that come in. And I can't remember the URL offhand.
It's Perspective. It's the Perspective API that anybody can use, actually. So it helps media companies filter through toxic comments. So that's a start. That actually came out of Jigsaw, which is Alphabet's research arm. And you can read more about it. It's all publicly available, as well as the API, if you want to try it out. Anyone else? We have one over here.
It's coming right there.
Okay. Hi. My name is Alok, and my question is, disability is, you could add that to the list. There's so much that applies there. For example, Microsoft development, there's a Microsoft development app for blind people that will describe the environment as they're walking around. So my question is, it seems like, this seems great, but there are some barriers preventing this from really moving. And how do you overcome that?
Devoting, if you're a large company, absolutely having a consciousness about it and devoting the resources, ensuring and demanding those resources are devoted to that. Comcast, a friend of mine heads up accessibility at Comcast, and I think, from my limited understanding, I think they've done a lot of work in that realm that I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I would say for Google, that's one of the focal points, I would say, around our product inclusion efforts. We understand that it's complicated, but it's definitely something that we're investing in and have been for a while. We know that we can't build products without having that inclusive lens around accessibility specifically, because our tools do touch so many people from so many different backgrounds. So I totally agree with you on that, and that's something that we're definitely really focused on.
And that was perfect. We're right exactly at time. Thank you so much. Please keep us posted on your efforts for driving machine learning for everyone. If you hashtag your progress, ML for the number 4 everyone, we'd love to see how you're all progressing, and we'll share our progress as well.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reena.
Thank you.